So then, if you awaken from this illusion,
persistence of vision.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Persistence of Vision podcast. Inspiring conversations all across the universe.
Across the universe?
That's right.
Hi, I'm Lance Fever Myers.
And I'm L.B. Dio.
Please check out our website. It is pov-publishing.com. There you can read essays, comics, poetry, all kinds of stuff. You can see all the links to our previous podcasts. You can also follow the links that you see there to Amazon, where you can buy my book, and the title is Why So Much. You can also buy... What else, LB?
You can buy your other book.
That's right.
Attack of the Christmas Clones.
Right. Clash of the Christmas Clones.
I beg your pardon.
Clash of the Christmas Clones. Go buy that. It's perfect for the upcoming holidays.
And you can also buy my book, last and least, The Goddamn Fool.
Hell yeah. So go do it. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, what are you waiting for?
So what do we have today? We have another podcast about another book.
Yet another book. It's getting a little ridiculous. We're very fortunate to have Miss Kelli Bland on the show, and she is here to discuss no other masterpiece than Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Welcome to the show, Kelli.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really glad you chose this book. I had never read it. I'm embarrassed to say I'd never read it, and I had always wondered what the hell that title means. And now I know, so thank you.
Oh, well, you are very welcome. Like I said, I was looking at a bunch of different books to try to pick which one I wanted to talk about, and this one was my first choice, so I'm happy to talk about it today.
Excellent. Well, what is it about the book that makes it such a choice for you?
I feel like whenever I read it at the time, it was a kind of pivotal book for me to read at the period of time I was in my life. It's kind of, it's beautiful. It's a little romantic. And that was kind of what my life felt like at the time. And I was living in Europe at the time.
Oh.
And so it, all of it just felt very, on point. And just in terms of thinking about where I was and about other people's perspectives and the problem of language. I don't know, just all of it was where I read it and I just felt like, a ding went off in my head. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, tell the readers why a book like this would resonate with someone living in Europe.
Oh, well, it is set in Europe, in Czechoslovakia, in 1968, and it takes place between the Prague Spring and I think the Russian occupation there. I'm not as familiar exactly with the historical events, other than what I skimmed back over when I was looking through the book.
Well, a lot of it happens after the Russian occupation.
Yeah. It's set there, and they go to different other places in there, to Paris and around, and so it's just like descriptions of beautiful places and art, and it's about a bunch of it's about an artist and a doctor and a professor and a photographer. So it's all of these.
And a dog.
And a dog, yes. A very sweet dog.
A charmingly named dog.
Yes.
Karenin, after the husband of Anna Karenina.
Right. Even though it's a female dog.
It's a female dog.
With a St. Bernard's face?
Something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So the author, Milan Kundera, I believe he's no longer with us. Isn't that right?
I don't know.
I don't think he is.
I could Google it.
Yes, we could Google it, but we're going to let the audience at home Google it. Interesting character. He fled from Czechoslovakia and became a French citizen, I guess. And interestingly, he declared that he was now a French author and that he wanted to be listed as such, put in the French literature section of bookstores and so forth.
Yeah, I feel like the journey of the artist Sabina, her character, I think a lot of the stuff that she talks about is like him talking about what he believes. Yeah. And I think that, later in the book, at one point she goes to California, I think. yeah, she tries to not even like tell people that she's Czech. Is what I remember of it. So
Interesting.
yeah, so I think there might be something there.
Well, a lot of our audience who haven't read the book may be familiar with it through the movie, which came out in the 80s. It had Daniel Day-Lewis, Juliette Binoche, and who is the woman who played Sabina? That was it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway,
I never saw the movie.
I haven't either. Is it close to the book? Does it?
I would say, I don't remember liking the movie that much, honestly. I think that it had its points. It was a little more overtly sexy than the book. Even though the book is very, very concerned with sex, I don't think of it as a particularly erotic book.
Yeah.
I mean, it is in a way, but it's certainly not.
It's not a steamy, like
it's not
descriptive
steamy,
kind of
right,
thing.
right.
It's just that plays a big role in the characters' lives.
And so the movie is very steamy then.
Yeah, the movie has these sexy scenes, one after the other.
Sure.
And which makes sense because the book is about what a womanizing husband who has dozens and dozens of mistresses. His wife, who is ultimately driven to her own infidelities, and then Sabina, who is, very, very sexual herself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to watch the movie as research for coming in, but then I saw it was 2 hours and 52 minutes. So I said, you know what, I'm all right.
Yes.
Well, before you showed up, we were talking about LB and I were talking about the language. I had mentioned that I liked the plain language, the very straightforward writing style of this book. But it also occurred to me that a lot of times you get that when it's when it's written in a foreign language, and I don't know how much of that comes from having been translated. So what's the original language? Is it Czech? Was it written in Czech? Or was it written in French?
It was written in Czech, but it's he wrote it in French, I think.
Oh, he did?
It came out in French first, and then 2 years later a Czech version came out. But maybe he wrote it in Czech and then translated it. I'm not quite sure.
Well, it made me think of I had read that Murakami, wrote in English specifically to get that very plain forward spoken sort of sound and feel because he had such a limited vocabulary in English. So I was wondering if French is his second language, I wonder
if that had some effect on the way it is. Yeah, I think that's totally possible. It makes me think a little bit of the Bald Soprano. He wrote that play. I don't know why I'm like blanked on the playwright, but Ionesco, the Bald Soprano. He wrote it in French, and it wasn't his first language. He was writing about the absurdity of language, and he thought it was a tragedy, and everyone thought it was a comedy.
Yeah. Well, also Beckett wrote "Waiting for Godot" in French, so must have been a fashionable thing to do at the time.
Well, it was a fashionable thing to do to go to France.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
It certainly is.
I've got to learn a different language so I can write another book.
Yes, it's about time. Well, you've got 2 out right now. Let's slow down, my God.
Well, I think that the structure of the book does it lends itself towards me as a reader. Like I like reading short fiction, and I will read poetry, and the chapters for this book are really short and very concise. Ideas are relayed to you, so you can just read one bit and it can mean something, which I really appreciated about the book. It made it very easy to read.
Well, it takes such a real talent and skill to capture really deep, really meaningful passages that are original feeling and sounding without having to resort to a thesaurus, right? To have it like the really, really straightforward descriptions and language to build such really deep and beautiful sentiments. Right?
I think so. I think a lot about the sections where he's talking about what one word means or what words mean to the characters and how they view things differently. And I remember that being like a oh yeah, what I think love is different than what someone else thinks love is, or trust, or even just lightness
compassion.
and darkness. So I thought that was it just blew my mind. I was not really thinking about other people, I guess, when you're young. And
well, it's a very important concept in the 20th century philosophy of this idea that words are a barrier to understanding each other as individual people, but also in terms of any ideas, that the communication of ideas is very difficult or even impossible because words have so many meanings. Some people have proposed a philosophical language where every word can only have one meaning and so forth. You can imagine that would be a very difficult challenge to
to learn that
to enforce, to get people to learn it and have conversations.
Well, and then people will take a couple of words and make a phrase, and then then the word means something else.
Right.
Exactly.
It's like that's like saying we've got to ban poetry.
Well,
for or at
least for the purposes of,
philosophical
conversations. But this is, speaking of philosophy, one of the more straightforwardly, or should I say, nakedly philosophical books. There is a lot of great philosophical novels in the 20th century, thinking of like the existentialists and Sartre, Camus, but none of them just come out and on the first page and say, okay, this is what this book is about. It's about a philosophy. I'm referring to a concept that was introduced by Nietzsche and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then there's this tone going through the entire book where you have these characters in intense emotional situations, but the author will step back and say, now let's talk about what all this means.
Yeah, which I like. Because I'm not a person that has, studied philosophy, if anything at all. I like there's some of it reading little books here and there, trying to get it and being like, oh, I don't know. And then I started having a feeling where I'm like, I don't know if I trust philosophers. I don't, like.
Good idea.
I dated a few philosophy majors, and I was like, they're just justifying whatever action they went for. But what I enjoyed about the book was that it did just say, it almost feels a little bit like a very, artsy thesis paper in a way, which I feel like I really liked. The illustrations of, what was going on with the characters then relates back to the point he's trying to make. Like I enjoyed that. I remember reading some reviews about it that just people had written crowdsourced reviews, and they felt like they were being talked down to, but I didn't mind it.
Yeah, I didn't think
let's hope so.
No, I didn't mind it at all either. I feel like it's the kind of thing where it's not trying to be too clever, too smart by hiding the metaphors or whatever. It's like just trying to say, okay, here's a philosophy, and here's how it's applying to these people, and that's I still felt very powerful and very emotional to me when it was described that way. So tell us, go ahead and let's go ahead and tell the listeners what the title means.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe you can help me with it too, because I've been thinking about it a lot. The Unbearable Lightness of Being is in reference to his thesis about Nietzsche and he was writing an argument against Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, which is that everything is doomed to happen over and over again. Is that a correct way of putting it?
That is absolutely correct. The doctrine of eternal recurrence, where you have to live your life over and over infinitely, and it can never change in any way.
Yeah. And he's saying, I guess, I think he's saying, that there's also the phrase he uses, einmal ist keinmal, which means, what does it mean? I should have taken notes. But it's that existentialist idea that what happens, life only happens once.
Right.
So.
He kind of says, listen, going back to this pre-Socratic philosopher Parmenides said that he talked about the oppositional aspects of the world, hunger and satiety and thirst and whatever. But and he said the weight was bad and lightness was good. And then Kundera here is taking exception to that idea or proposing a counter.
Well, yeah, but we have to still have yet to tie the idea that if it is eternally recurring, that sort of ties everything down. That becomes the weight. That becomes the heaviness.
It's something that happens over and over again. It takes on an immense weight.
Right.
Yes.
So when life, if life does eternally recur, then every action is happening infinitely. And that adds weight to existence. And so if it only happens once, and you only live through these things one time, then they're terribly light.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so beautifully described when he's at the very beginning trying to make a decision, and he can't decide what to do.
Yeah.
And it's because this is all just a sketch. This is all just, there's no building up to this. There's no learning from it. It only happens once, and there's no practice for it.
Yeah, there's no way to know whether you've made the right decision.
Right. Or whether you're going to.
You have no past occurrences to pull from to help you make your decision.
And the lightness of the living once is unbearable because you don't know what to do. It's too light. It's too, I don't know. Am I describing this properly? Help us out.
I mean, I think I remember whenever. Well, I had a boyfriend at the time. It was my overseas boyfriend. He was the one who was like, "You have to read the book." As far as I remember, I don't know. My memory's a little fuzzy in general, but I believe that he's the one that told me to read it, and I did, and I read it. And I just remember reading the title and thinking, "Oh, I know what that feels like." Like before reading it at all, it was like, I was also getting into existentialism at the time. Very, very exciting thought for me. I was religious growing up of my own choice, not my parents. And so at one point I left the church and had been kind of, I think, dealing with the idea that I was just going to die and that was going to be it.
Yes.
Right? And also, very angry at God and, all that stuff that happens, with that kind of experience. So, living life, existentialism made me feel like they talk about the existentialist smile, because life is meaningless, because there's no reason for anyone to be here, then there's no reason why not to have a good time is kind of what I took from it, know?
Yeah, right.
But also, the idea of like our existence being, I don't know. So I'm not really making sense, but when I read the title, I was like, I know what that feels like. And it made me wanted to read it.
And it's kind of ironic in a way, too, because we're talking about these people who are tormented by the lightness of their existence, and yet the political background of the story is, I can only describe it as extremely heavy. I mean, there are literally tanks rolling into their country, and the country is being taken over by the secret police, and we don't think of these kinds of things as light normally.
No. Well, and their human dramas in contrast seem very much more important, I don't know, in general than...
Right. The way it's described in the book, it's still their interpersonal relationships that take the spotlight.
Yeah, and it's just there in the background. The tanks are like in the back, except for Teresa, right? She's a photographer. She's a war photographer. Yes. But even in those sections, she talks about her great joy. And
right. She's so excited. That's the happiest she's ever been.
Yeah.
Well,
going and taking
it makes sense. Right? If your life is too light and you finally find something heavy to attach yourself to, in this case, a terrible, tragic, horrible event, but nevertheless something you can go out and sink your teeth into.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Good call.
And Tomas has a very serious situation on his hands because he also, another instance of the philosophical in this work is his... paper that he writes, or his letter to the editor, about communism.
Yeah, he got in trouble, or I can't remember. The ending of the book is more fuzzy for me.
Yeah, well, he writes a book. He writes a letter to the editor of a newspaper, in which he compares the communists to, or certain communists, the ones who seem to be more innocent because they honestly believed that they were going to create a paradise on earth, and so it was worth killing all the people they killed. And he compares them to Oedipus, who discovers that through no fault of his own, he has slept with his mother and killed his father, and that the Oedipus reaction to this was just not to say, well, it's not my fault, but rather to put out his own eyes, and that there's a certain dramatic logic to that. And he says, well, why shouldn't the communists, who really legitimately believed they were doing a good thing, why shouldn't they also put their eyes out in the same way?
Right.
And the secret police doesn't think that that's the most compelling argument they've ever heard.
Right. Right.
Fighting word.
Well, this has been a fantastic experience coming across this book. Thank you for recommending it to us.
Oh, yeah.
It was really quite a joy. So the book was written in 1982. It was published, 2 years later?
Yeah, in 1984.
When did you first read it?
I believe that I had read it. So I was in Europe, so it would have been 2004 that I read it. Uh-huh. Yeah, I remember reading it and then reading 100 Years of Solitude, like one right after the other.
Right.
Both very important books for me. Yeah, it was around then. I went to school in East Texas, to a college in East Texas, got my theater degree from Stephen F. Austin State University. And we have, or the school has a connection with a conservatory in England, in Kent County, this place called Sid Cup that everybody called Shit Cup, but it was a very cool school. And they had a program called the European Theater Arts Program. I joined the second year of that program, and it was all studying experimental theater, physical theater. And I had never left home before. I had never flown on a plane before. I was pretty poor. So going to live in London, and then later I studied in Barcelona, it was like hugely eye-opening, and it was so exciting. And Teresa's journey is the one that, well, I feel a little bit like I understand. I can put myself in the shoes of each of those characters, or I have been each of those characters at different points in my life. And her like leaving her home and moving, and taking in a new world, like all of that was very prevalent to me at the time.
Yes, so Teresa is from a very small town. Is that right?
Yeah, she's a very small town.
But
she's
at the same time, she's never been to the country at some point. That's it. So I guess she's from like a suburb. But at some point, they talk about going to the country, and he says she's never been to the country. I don't know why. I found that very arresting.
Yeah. But yeah, so when I read it, it was like, mind blown. So exciting. Look at all this beauty everywhere. I'm reading these beautiful books, and I'm studying cool stuff. And so, yeah, it was a very exciting point in my life. Yeah. Yeah.
What did you think of Tomas, the womanizing, philandering husband, who seems to me to come off as very sympathetic despite his actions? But I wonder what you all think of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is something where like there's this kind of ambiguous morality around the book, I feel like. So you start just, something that I would maybe hear about on the news or whatever might piss me off more than, than reading it in this beautiful book.
Right.
I remember thinking about it whenever I was kind of going through it before this, and it irritated me more, but there's something that is very like, well, this is just how I am. I need to, not be faithful, and this is right. But doesn't it, towards the end, he finds happiness or comfort with her? Yes. He does, like, whatever his restlessness, it goes away. So maybe that excuses it for me. I don't know.
Well, I think for me, it felt a little weird, and I wondered why he included this aspect of Tomas's character, was that he has a child. And at the beginning, it talks about how I guess was he married to the mother at one point?
Yes, I think so.
And then when she that's right. Because when they get divorced, he has to contribute a third of his income to raising the child, but he's only allowed to see it every other weekend. And then, and the mother keeps making excuses not to let him see the child. And at one point, he just writes it all off. He's like, "Screw this! I'm not doing this anymore."
He's just done.
Right. And his parents get like really angry with him, and they cut him off because they're like, "If you're not going to talk to your child, we're not going to talk to our child." Yeah. And it's like, so in one decision, he like alienates an entire side of his family,
just abandons,
and that's it, right?
And he's sort of happy, right?
He's like, oh, that's what I wanted to do. Like, he abandoned his family,
which Franz later does exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
he leaves his wife, and for a brief time at least, he experiences a great sense of
relief.
Lightness.
Yeah.
that they're all gone. All these people that he'd been feeling so guilty
for. All that stuff I cared about. I guess I didn't care about it that much. Yeah.
But it's really striking because it's not like a book about Tomas and his sexual adventures, and isn't that fun? It's a book about Tomas and Teresa is suffering horrifically.
Yeah.
As a result of these things, and yet you don't hate Tomas for doing it somehow, or at least I felt like I didn't.
Well, just to hear you talk about it, and you say his sexual adventures, but it didn't seem to me like they were written as though they were sexual adventures. More just like, oh, this is what I do. This is what I like to do. And I don't make any apologies for it. And it's not like it didn't feel like adventures more than just like,
or like he was like being really sneaky.
Yeah, just do this. And
he does lie about it though at first.
He does. Yeah.
But he has this kind of like his own personal take on it is like, these are like erotic friendships. Yeah. Right? And
right. Yes. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to be cheated on. And I mean, I feel like Teresa's pain is palpable, and I feel for her when I read her, and she's having these awful dreams, like they have all these dreams where he's like, there's like women at a pool and he's like shooting them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tomas is shooting them and she's there. They're all singing. They have to sing really loud. I don't know. That also has to do, I guess, with like conformity and other stuff. But like, that's funny. Why don't I hate him? That means he did a good job, I guess.
Yes, he did a good job. Well, I guess we identify with him, I guess. And that's the bottom line. We see where he's coming from. We feel his perspective when he's the person we're examining at any given point.
Yeah. I feel like I think my least favorite character in the book. Can we talk about that? My least favorite character in the book is Franz. I just don't really like him, and I think I see him the way Sabina sees him, like his lover. Like she looks at him and she pities him, or she, So then I just pity him too. I'm like,
yeah, and it's funny because he's a brilliant scholar with a fantastic reputation. He's got a beautiful body. He's this very muscular, strong man. And yet the way she looks at him is just like, this guy is such a sucker. He's just such a loser. And she's like, I can't anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, if back to Tomas, as far as his infidelities and his whole like attitude about, like relationships goes, I wonder if that makes us see his relationship with Teresa like even more powerfully, because he's talking about he can't even sleep next to a woman. Like,
at the beginning.
It's like he can't do it, and he'll kick them out, or he'll drive them home, or he'll always makes an excuse not to sleep side by side. But then with Teresa, he's like he loves it.
Yeah,
and he has to redefine like, I guess
he
love
declares that love is not about sex at all, but it's entirely about sleeping next to someone.
Yeah. Well, and he goes and he leaves her, right? He leaves her, and then he comes back. And I think, their relationship, for me, I guess, is like they weathered all of this time to get to the point where they are comfortable and happy, satisfied with where they're at. They had to go through all of this turmoil to get to a place. And I don't know, is that also supposed to be like a metaphor for the political things that are happening in there too? Or is it in opposition to? I don't know.
No, I mean, that's a very interesting question. Yeah, I mean,
I don't know the answer.
When we live in a world where we have the Soviet Union coming in, and as he says a very interesting line in there. He says that the Soviet Union has come and transformed life in Czechoslovakia, perhaps for centuries. Of course, we in retrospect know that it's only going to be about another 20 years, and it's all going to fall down. But there's that weight again, right?
Right.
This irreversible seeming development that is affecting them so profoundly.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting. I mean, when they do come in and take over, and they take the president?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, into some like labor camp for a little while. When he comes back, he addresses the people on the radio, and he's like,
yeah, they do mock executions of the president.
Oh,
and so when he comes back, there's a beautiful line, right, where it says that they force him to do a speech where he says he loves the Soviet Union. He's so glad that they took over, and he says it says that at certain points he'll take pauses in a single sentence of up to 30 seconds.
Right. Yeah, because he's like, there was some word that he used, or some description about how something about the effect. I've totally lost it, but I remember being impressed by the description, and it did have to do with him giving the speech and stuttering through it, and feeling like obviously so affected by having spent 6 weeks or whatever it was
being tortured or being and then they talk about, I guess it's Tomasz. They talk about how pitiful he sounds and how it's like heartbreaking to listen to him be so weak. Yeah.
And then Teresa, though, she finds that she's identifying with his weakness in a way that she suddenly doesn't disdain his weakness. It's interesting. I guess you could think of this book as the story of people and an author creating the story who are too sophisticated, too artistic, too intelligent to care all that much about politics, and are forced to talk about politics. Right. And that's almost the tragedy, that they have no choice but to deal with, and they do their best to stay out of all that and to live their lives and be focused on each other and focused on art and things like that. But they can't really entirely do that.
Sounds familiar.
Right? Oh, yeah, of course.
All right. Well, I think I hear thunder in the distance.
Here it comes. I think that's the lightning round.
Oh my God!
Approaching quickly.
Yes, it seems to be rolling in. The sky is getting dark.
Kelly?
Yes.
How do you feel? Are you ready for it?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. Tell us about the first time you fell in love with a book.
First time I fell in love with a book was Harriet the Spy. My third grade teacher, as a gift that year, I'd read a lot of books that year, and she gave me that book as like a present at the end of the year. And I remember I read it like a few different times.
You loved it.
I loved it. She was so sneaky. She was like taking notes all the time, and I tried to keep a journal, but I'm not good at keeping a journal.
It's hard.
Yeah.
You wanted to be a spy.
I know. I was like, oh, yeah. I remember loving that book.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Has the book ever changed your mind about anything?
It's hard to say. I feel like changing my perspective is probably a better way of putting it. I mean, I think this book is one of those books. Unbearable Lightness of Being is one of those books. Changed my mind. I mean, like I said, I was religious when I was younger, and I read the Bible a lot. So, I mean, I think that was continuously changing my mind, over time. So I probably had that one, maybe.
Okay. All right. Well, has a book ever changed your life then?
Well, if I was thinking about this, because that's always really hard. I feel like there are movies and there are artworks that have, changed my life. But probably the single most important piece of writing I ever that did something to me, that changed the way my life went, was Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my grandmother had a laser disc of the Zeffirelli version of Romeo and Juliet, and I watched it every time I went over to her house, as often as I could. I loved it, and I was in third grade around the time Harriet the Spy, too, around that same time.
Yeah.
I went to the library and I got, I got all the plays and I brought it and I tried to read it while I watched the movie.
Wow.
I was like reading it at the same time, trying to understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
And then, I went on to do theater and went on to, be here today.
There you go.
Great answer. All right. Has a book ever made you cry?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I cry like very easily.
Chewing gum wrapper.
Yeah. I cry a lot. This book, 100 Years of Solitude, like Shakespeare's plays, poems. Like I said, I get very touched.
Has a book
easily.
ever not made you cry?
I'm sure. I read a lot of R.L. Stine books. I'm sure none of them made me cry.
Well, I think you've already answered this, but tell us a book that you've read more than once.
Now I've read this book more than once.
Lovely.
I did read Harriet the Spy a lot. Like I said, I read the Bible quite a bit. Shakespeare's plays, I had read some of them over and over again. It's hard for me to go back to books after I read them, but I would say probably movies I watch over and over a lot more than books, but
right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here comes the big one. Do you have any poetry committed to memory?
Okay, right. I've been thinking about this one the most.
Yeah?
Because I used to memorize poems all the time. When I was younger, I loved memorizing poems. It was like I was totally into Poe, and I remember memorizing The Bells because I thought it was such a funny poem to memorize.
Plus, every other word is bells.
Yeah. You just have to remember, did I say bells 8 times? I used to know a lot of poems. But if I'm trying to think of what I can remember, it would be Shakespeare. It is tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in, this petty pace from day to day until the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have but lit the way to dusty death. That's not exactly right. Out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard of no more.
Beautiful.
It was close. Not one word perfect, but close.
I love it.
You improved it.
That is fantastic. You have joined the ranks of those who have given us poetry, and I love it.
Kelli Bland, what can we say except thank you so much for introducing both of us to this book that neither of us had read. And
wow, I just assumed like everybody had read it.
Well, I should have read it, but you've caught me up to speed. I love it.
Good. I'm so glad. Thank you for having me.
Oh, what a treat.
Fun.
Thank you for joining us.
Well, we are POV, right? We are Persistence of Vision Publishing. So go to our website. It is pov-publishing.com. There you can read comics, essays, poetry, all that stuff. You can see links to other podcasts that we've done with other guests, talking about other cool books. What else?
It's just cool.
It's just cool, man. Cool. Just go there, buy our books, read them, buy several copies.
Yeah, what are you
Christmas
waiting
is
for?
coming up. Come on now.
Get on with it. Thank you, Kelli Bland.
Thank you, Kelli. Thank you to the listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
Adios.